I am so excited about today's guest. Her name is Cathy Heller, and I had the pleasure of being on her show, which is called Don't Quit Your Day Job, about maybe 6 weeks ago. And we had such a fantastic conversation. She is so mesmerizing, so filled with inspiration. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about her, and I hope that you enjoy my interview with her. It was really more of like a girlfriend jam is what it felt like. But if you haven't heard her podcast, Don't Keep Your Day Job, she has over 23 million downloads of that show. It is so inspiring, all about how to tap into your passion and do what it is that you want and make money doing it. Her story is amazing. She's interviewed so many amazing people, from the person who started Starbucks, Matthew McConaughey, a whole bunch of different actors, but really people in the business space as well, talking about how they started with an idea, a thought, something that other people didn't understand. So she encourages people weekly to sort of tap into their own passion, their own power. She's really interviewed everyone from Harry Connick Jr. to Jason Mraz to Malcolm Gladwell, Bobbi Brown Cosmetics founder Bobbi Brown, Adam Grant, who's a psychologist that I know of, Shark Tank's Barbara Corcoran. So anyway, her stuff is so interesting. But what I find very different about Cathy is that she is so accessible. She is so open-hearted. So anyway, we talk about how you can tap into your passion, how you can pivot from what you're doing now to something that you really want to do. She shares her own personal story. So I hope that you enjoy my girlfriend jam with Cathy Heller, because I so enjoyed interviewing her. Hi, Kath.
Hi, Terri. Cool. I'm so happy to be here.
Welcome to the Terri Cole Show. I'm so psyched. Hold on, let me just move that out of the way. Sorry. If you're not watching this, you don't realize, but I had things in front of the camera.
Lots of things.
So many things to talk about, Kath. So why don't we start with Don't Quit Your Day Job and what inspired you? You got a book, you got your very popular podcast, which I like very much. And I guess how did this come to be for you?
I have to say first, I just have to say it so I'm not bursting. I love you so much. I have met maybe less than a handful of humans my whole life who make me feel um as safe and loved, and it's like you are literally instant best friend material. Having you on my show, I felt was life changing. So if anyone's listening, please listen to her on my show, although you listen to her in her show, but she's just, you know how she is. I got more out of that conversation than I've crossed oceans and rivers and mountains to get a morsel of what you shared with me. So thank you for being you. I started my podcast
I love you.
4.5 years ago. Um, I think every kid has a thing, maybe. And some kids are really good at drawing and some kids are really good at basketball. And I always had a lot of empathy. And I always could just really see people, and maybe I felt that I could hold up a mirror and help them see their gifts in a way maybe they couldn't see it. And so I've always done what I do on my show, just in my life. Like I'd meet an Uber driver or have a neighbor or talk to a waitress and say, but what do you really want to do? And I felt as though, Terri, there was always like a couple things in the way, like the lie of, well, it's not really possible what I actually want to do, or I'm really, really not enough. I'm not tall enough. I'm not thin enough. I'm not old enough. I'm not young enough. So then when I would get beyond that, I would say, okay, so if those two things went away, like, could you really do what you wanted? And for me, that's really the relationship I had with my mom growing up. And do you know Tara Brock? You probably
Yeah.
do. Yeah. She said to me, I think everything we all do is ultimately we do it for our mothers, like we write every book for our mother. So my mom growing up had all these gifts dying inside of her. She was the senior superlative in her senior yearbook, most talented, most likely to be on Broadway. And actually, when she was a senior in high school, she was the lead in her show, Once Upon a Mattress. And the girl who played her understudy is a girl named Ellen Green, who went on to be in Little Shop of Horrors, bop, bop. So she did that. And she said to my mom, like, let's go into the city and audition. And my mom was like, I can't audition because I need to go become a mom. And I have to choose between my dreams and everything else. And my
Mm,
mom really does have that thick of a New York accent. And so
I love it.
she gave up herself,
Mm,
and she was in a really yucky marriage, and that
mm.
marriage ended. And then she had a really bad divorce, and she never left the house again. And I grew up watching her sort of deteriorating. And I said, you know what? That's a cautionary tale for me. So I want to do stuff that I love doing. I don't want to have to choose between being a mom or having a self. And I really could feel how many people around me were like my mom with their gifts dying inside of them. So this show was
So, well,
bursting from me. It had to come out.
it's so beautiful though, Kathy, the whole learning from instead of replicating.
That
You
is
know,
good. That's good.
we're so conditioned to repeat for so many reasons. There's this unconscious loyalty stuff where I've talked to zillions of clients. You feel guilty if you out earn your
Mm,
parents or if you're more successful than. And I think that this is a choice, but it is nature and nurture. So your personality, like who you were at birth, because I really think that both of those things influence what we do, and that instead of you being like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do, so I'm going to do that, you went the opposite way. Like, as you said, cautionary tale, I don't want to do that, but I am sure that there are many people listening who are in jobs or in experiences where they're like, hey man, this is super not my passion. So how can someone get clarity in your professional opinion, because you are a professional at this, at what they're meant to do, like what their purpose is, right? How can we find that if we
yeah.
were like checking boxes all day long, you
Oh,
know?
yeah. It's such a great question, isn't it? Because I believe, I know this is a bold thing to say, but I really believe it. And I kind of know it too. So I have certainty around this, that everybody who's here has an assignment, everybody is
Yep.
needed. And what I do think is beautiful is that what lights us up as humans, and I don't know that this is true for koala bears or giraffes. Koala bears and giraffes seem pretty happy if they get their basic needs met, if they can
Right.
eat, if they can sleep, if they can procreate, have shelter. But I don't know that koala bears sit there and say, I need to contribute. And at the same time, I think humans do need that. I think humans feel most seen when we see others, when we impact, when we contribute. And I think that there are ways in which we get to play the instrument that is who we are, right? And so
Mm,
when we do that, we feel exhilarated, right? And so that's really such an important question what you asked, because I think everyone on some level knows that they have that thing, which is why they can't let it go. Like if on some level they didn't really believe that they had a thing, they would move on. They would just watch Netflix and move on. But they're like, no, a part of me knows that I'm sitting it out and playing it small. So then the question is, how do you find out what that thing is? Well, I've realized that I've done an expert amount of work, meaning we've almost 500 episodes of this show. And this is what I've been listening to and studying and researching for 5 years nonstop. And so what I've come to find out, one thing is that Emily Esfahani Smith, who this is what she did her TED talk on, she said 1/3 of the world has a clear as day knowing of like, I am meant to sculpt. I am meant to be a doctor. 2/3 of the world, they don't discover their passion, rather they develop it.
mm,
So then what is that about, right? Well, that's actually the path of the warrior. And what that looks like is, instead of thinking that first you are going to be sent by email from God a master plan, instead you're going to get like Hansel and Gretel breadcrumbs.
mm,
And you're going to ask yourself, not what's my purpose with a capital P, but what is that next clue, that next lily pad to jump to? And if you ask it that way, typically you can get that next clue. For me, when I came out to LA at 23 years old, I was like, I feel like I want to sing, I want to write music. And so I went all in with that clue, and I wrote mediocre songs, and then I wrote better songs, and then I got a record deal at Interscope. And then about 6 weeks in, Ron Fair called me. I was driving on the 10. This is where you spend most of your time in LA. And I
Mhm.
pulled over and he said, Jimmy Iovine really likes you. Everyone likes you, Kathy. You're a really likable person, but we're not really 100% sure we're going to make this record, that it's going to work. So we're not going to do it this time, but I know something's going to happen for you. Well, when we got off that call, I felt like I had met the Wizard of Oz and there was no way home. And
Mm.
I gave up, and I just started looking in the paper at like what would be a day job I could get. And so I worked many day jobs. I worked in a casting office. I worked in a real estate office. I worked in an interior design office. I was just like trying things on. And one day I was walking from the elevator to my car and I saw my face in the elevator door mirror, and I just burst into tears because I didn't recognize myself.
Mm.
And I was like, well, what's the next clue? Right. And I like, for people who are listening right now, I want you to start saying that to yourself instead of saying, I don't know, which is really not helping you. How
Mm.
about you start to say, there are clues everywhere? So then the question is, what's the next clue? What's the next baby step? And what if we just started shooting out into the world these like rockets of desire, and we move out of the resistance and knowing how it has to play out, and we just take that next step? So the next step for me was, I'm really unhappy. I think I need to quit this job. And I saw an article in a magazine about songwriters who were licensing their music to TV shows like Grey's Anatomy. And I said, well, what if I did that? What if I reached out to those people? I don't know. I don't know anybody at a network. I don't know what songs they need. But I went all in. And for 2 years, I wrote songs, and then I wrote more songs. And then it turned into a decade. And for 1 decade, I wrote songs and pitched songs, and I wrote songs for McDonald's and Target and Coca-Cola and Grey's Anatomy and Pretty Little Liars. And I started making a few $100,000 a year, and I had a baby and another baby, and it was pretty fulfilling until I was ready for my next clue. And I had outgrown the pot that I was sitting in. The tree was growing, needed another pot. And the next clue came because other people were saying, hey, how did you do that? How did you do that? And I was like, is this a clue? No, 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 no. I'm an artiste. I don't teach anyone anything. And then it was like, well, what if I said yes to whatever the next clue is? What if I just let myself say yes to the next clue and the next clue and the next clue, and really be in an abundance mindset of like, why should I only do one thing? So I said yes, and I started actually helping other songwriters. And then I started an online class helping songwriters called Six Figure Songwriting. I didn't know the first thing about anything online. I didn't know anything about webinars or anything else. I just showed up with my pregnant belly, spoke to the camera, and said, hey, I'm going to do this class called Six Figure Songwriting. And at the end of that first webinar, I said it would be $1,000, and I would teach any songwriter who wanted to know how they can get their music in film and TV. And it's my own personal experience. And 147 people bought it, and I made 147 grand. And then within a year, it turned into $2 million in revenue just from the class.
Wow.
And then one of my students said, another a little clue. She said, why don't you start a podcast? Because so much of what you teach has to do with being resourceful, has to do with having empathy, has to do with writing the right kinds of emails that really connect with people on a personal level, has to do with this, has to do with that. And you're also constantly showing people that it's not all or nothing, right? It's not Taylor Swift or nothing. You can make a living. So you should start a podcast. So I said, okay, that's another clue. I'm starting a podcast. Started the podcast at 37, and it's 4 years later, and we have 23 million downloads.
Oh my
It
God.
added, 8 figures to my life, 200 brand partnerships, 2 book deals. Now I'm working on a TV show. And I think that outlines not only my example, the only example I've lived, but that literally is what's happened with every single person I had on my podcast, from Howard Schultz telling me about how he built Starbucks, to Matthew McConaughey's story of how he got that big break on Dazed and Confused. Everybody's just taking that next clue and saying to it, yes. And you don't know. And this is what I would say, because you get the world of humankind so well, and heartbreak. I think what's really at stake, it's not the business idea that's the problem. It's not the dream that's the problem. It's not a dream problem. It's just a courage problem.
Yep.
I think that what happens is by the age of 11, our heart gets shattered. Somebody leaves, somebody dies, somebody hurts you, somebody rejects you. And there is a part of us that says, oh, I just got the most brilliant idea. I'm not falling for that again.
Right.
And the way I'm going to avoid that is I'm not going to want for very much. I'm not going to reach too far, and I'm not going to put a lot at stake on anything. And so then we get to the age of like 31 or 46 and we go, why is there no there here? There's no
Mm,
there. And it's
right.
because we've kind of taken the life and the adventure out of it because we want to be safe.
Yes. And I was going to say about I love that whole thing. And thank you for your story. It's just so beautiful and inspiring. Here's the thing about the courage, because you said, feeling like it's a courage problem. And I agree. It's that this notion that we're so incredibly fragile. And what I've seen in 25 years in the trenches with my clients is that we're incredibly resilient, and that we want to stay in our comfort zone, but our comfort zone is a mother effing prison 99.9% of the time. And so I think that what's so inspiring about what you're saying is that this is very doable. So anyone listening, being like, it's too late and that ship sailed and I can't, and no, the reality is there are, as Kath is saying, there's crumbs, there's clues, there is something that if you're willing to look, if you open your mind, I learned this years ago from Deepak Chopra when I was doing some week-long like intensive meditation thing at the Chopra Center with Vic, my husband. And he was basically saying part of the benefit of having a dedicated meditation practice is that you start to become more awake in your actual life, and that you start to pay attention to meaningful coincidences, right? I call it synchrotastic happenings, where you're like, wow, I could not have scripted that shit, but I'm awake enough to see it, and it means something. Take the next step. So I feel like your message is very aligned with what he was saying. It's like, instead of being like, oh, did I make that up as a clue? Look at it and go, I was just thinking about this, and now I see a commercial for it, or whatever the thing is that's like, take the next step. But what do you say for people who feel unworthy, right? Well, what about the imposter syndrome that we've all certainly experienced? At least I've had it for more like brief periods of time, but still it's terrifying when you're like, oh my God, they're all going to find out that I don't know anything, like that's the fear and the feeling.
Sure.
So what do you say to listeners who feel, that they're not ready yet?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think that that's the biggest block. And so I always tell my listeners and I tell people who come through my workshops that I really love C students and I want them to give themselves a permission slip to be messy. I think that our real selves are born in the moments of spontaneity. And so I think the unwillingness to tolerate being messy is a big problem. I think people believe and assume that Lady Gaga like wrote a song and it was a number one single versus tolerating maybe 100 songs that got rejected. If you go to see the Carole King musical Beautiful, you like watch her go to the Brill building time after time and they're like, not quite, not yet. And then when she wrote Tapestry,
Mm-hmm.
it was many years into writing so many songs that were not quite, not quite, finally better, finally better. And then, yeah, she wrote a record where every song was a hit single because that was her like 415th song, right?
Right.
So we don't give ourselves the grace to be messy. And that's a big problem, right? You don't see what's underneath Fred Astaire's tap shoes. Look at his feet, right? Look how Serena's coughing up blood on the side of the
Mm-hmm.
court, right? There's a gift in giving yourself the grace to be imperfect on your way to mastery. And we live in a time where there's no resilience. It's like if I can't get the ROI immediately,
Right.
I cannot bear it. So what I think is at stake is a lot of shame, right? And what's interesting about the imposter syndrome is it's almost false humility because people will say like, oh, who am I to do this? It's like, who are you not to do it? Like, you get a pass? So everyone else is supposed to show up and help make the world better with their gifts, right? This one's going to bring more art to the world. This one's going to, open a yoga studio. This one's going to read poetry. But you don't have to. You get to sit it out, right? No, you're needed. Let's go. Get off the bench. Oprah's going to fix everybody? No, do your part, even if it's in your neighborhood, shine your light, add your value. And there's also this false humility in the sense of no one's thinking about you. Like, let's say you're so worried that if you get divorced, everyone's going to talk about it. And if you start a business and it fails on Main Street, no, you know what's going to happen? Robin's going to go to lunch with Sue and she's going to go, oh my God, did you hear whose business failed? Her business. I mean, of course. And then they're going to go, do you want to split the tuna tartare? What do you think? Like
Yep.
they're over you in 5 seconds. You're
Right.
not that important. So here you are with this false humility of who am I to do it, thinking somehow you make up everyone's biggest concerns and thoughts. It's not juicy enough, right? Like
Right.
Simone Biles, she was so important for 5 minutes. They're going to have a new hero next week. They're going to, even something as heroic as that, they're going to forget that happened. They don't care, right? There's
Yep.
going to be people who are still going to love Bill Cosby, even with everything he did. People don't care enough about us. It doesn't, there's
Yep.
too much juicy stuff going on. So I think we need to say, hey, at the end of the day, I'm aware of my assignment. And what I get out of showing up for my potential is meeting my edge, finding that upper limit, and then showing up anyway, right? Having that hard conversation anyway, being willing to put the thing out there, even if my aunt tells me I'm a horrible artist, but I'm going to sell that jewelry anyway. What you get from it is the satisfaction of growth, which is what your soul craves. And the real thing when it comes to imposter syndrome is it's just a story that's not true. The whole idea that you buy into this narrative, that you are this ego, that you are 5 feet, 4 inches, and you have this much money in your bank account, you weigh this much, and you come from this zip code, and your father was this, and you're like, that is the smallest of the smallest of the smallest speck of a kernel of what you really are, when really you are made of the same source energy that builds the world, that builds worlds, universes, black holes, Milky Ways, right? It's running through us. And we are, if you look at an atom, we are looking at what we are, right? It's a reflection of what we are, which is, it is 99% energy and it's 0.01% particle. So you're going to define yourself by the smallest aspect of what you are rather than the energy of what you are. And the truth is that when you buy into a relationship or you buy a Coca-Cola or you buy anything, you buy what someone says, it's the energy of it anyway, right?
Yeah.
So we're all energy. And if you meet the people who I've met, including you talk to Brian Grazer, who's been on my show, like it's his enthusiasm that built Imagine Entertainment. That's why Ron Howard partnered with him. Brian was an intern at Warner Brothers with no credentials. And he's like, Ronnie Howard, let's do this thing, man. I can do this. And he's like, who is this guy with this crazy head of hair? But he had so much enthusiasm. And you talk to Howard Schultz about how he tells me, Kath, I grew up in public housing. I grew up, my mom, listen to this. Howard Schultz, we know, created Starbucks. He told me his mother used to say, we live at the last stop of the L train in Canarsie, Brooklyn. And she used to say, but it's not your last stop. You don't get off here. This isn't where you get off. And he says to me, you don't understand. I had to do my homework in the stairwell. We had no space in my house. And then he created this idea of like, maybe, just maybe he could open a little shop where it wasn't about the bacon and the eggs. It was just about the sitting and the lingering over the coffee. And of course, 35,000 stores later, it's a $4 billion business. He makes billions while he's sleeping. It's about where is the real creative genius, right? It's getting out of this limiting, small, slow vibration, heavy molasses. What is that? That none of that's actually, you can calibrate to that, or you can calibrate to like, let's go. You know what moves things into motion? My excitement, my passion, my compassion, my love.
Yep.
What you really need, what people don't get, whether you're going to be a successful therapist or a successful podcaster, it's called an open heart. When you drop in to an open-hearted vibration and you are present with people, you break through the noise. I don't care if you have no followers. You'll have 1,000 followers by the end of the day.
Yep.
And if we can just trust that, nobody's imposter. Nobody is incapable. We live in a time where there is such an empathy deficit that if you could actually have empathy for yourself and then empathy for someone else, and it's genuine, and you can be present and hold space for someone else, every door is open to you.
Right.
So this being an imposter goes back to when we're kids. I think most of us grow up in a house where love is earned.
Mm.
And you're an imposter because in order for you to even be worthy of showing up and showing your face, you have to earn it. That's not the way love really works. Love is given, and people want to give it. And when you are willing to just know that being in an open-hearted state and being a person and being available, willing to raise your hand and say, hey, I don't have all the answers, but I'm available right now. What do you need help with? I'll dig a ditch with you. What do you need help with? I'll sit with you till you get through this night. What do you need help with? I don't know. I don't know how to type. Let me help. Let me try. You don't need to be an imposter for that.
Right. It's so true. The whole thing about the wholehearted or open-hearted, the being willing to be of service to other people, again, really aligned with Deepak's work and what he talks about. You want more love, give more love.
Right.
You want more abundance, help someone else get rich or whatever. But it also brings me to, as was making me while you were talking, Kath, I was enthralled. And I was also thinking about the feeling that I had reminded me of when I first heard Brene Brown talking about that the wholehearted people and how vulnerability and this willingness to be messy, as you had said before, and this willingness to show up and figure it out, but also to tell the truth about the way that we feel or what we want, and how vulnerability, she really has blown the roof off of the way that we perceive it. But in my own life, I never had connected those dots between my own willingness, not just naturally, no intention about it, but just naturally being a very wholehearted lover of others, all kinds of others, any other people, all the people, that made me look at it and go, oh, I do feel things so deeply like you, like being an empath, a highly sensitive person, but there's such the energy when we allow ourselves to not only be of service, but to be imperfect. This whole thing with perfectionism, I thought of like 7,000 things while you were talking, but another one of them was about perfectionism and how that is such a trap of misery. And that even though perfectionists usually get really good at like whatever their thing is, right? So they become a brilliant something, but maybe they really also want to play the violin, but they won't play the violin because they're not brilliant at that. But the energy, the resonance, the joy that would come from, and actually one of my really close friends, a brilliant sober coach, took up the violin. And she came up here and we have chickens and we have geese, and she went outside and she hadn't played in a long time and it didn't sound great, but it looked great. And she loved it and the animals loved it. And I was looking at her and I was thinking how inspiring she is to me, the willingness to follow your heart's desire, to listen to what you want something. She always wanted to play the violin, didn't do it as a kid. I think she's 65 now. And she's like, ugh, my shoulder's killing me. This is killing me. She's like, I'm going to get acupuncture because holding the thing is hurting me. But she doesn't stop. And I think this sort of brings us back to, yes, I firmly agree with you on the whole imposter syndrome thing. But there's also choices that we have to continually make. And when you were telling the story about the Starbucks guy, I literally don't even think I can say it because I think I'm going to cry. I don't know why I am. I don't know what about the end of that story just struck me so like right in the heart and the throat, where you said, the mother said, I'm crying.
You don't get off here.
You don't get off here. And it's like how incredibly loving it is to want. My wish, my desire is always that my kids, no comparison to me, but that they're as successful, do all of it better, please. My prayer is that you learned from me and dad's mistakes, and that hopefully we gave you good examples of things, but that you do better. Never is it feeling threatened by the success of your kids. It's like, we do all this work because we want you to do better. And there was something, I don't know, there was something so very New
Oh,
York and
so beautiful.
right,
So
like
beautiful. And he told me how his whole life, like, he wants to make them proud. And they both passed away years before he was really, really successful.
mm,
But he he had that sense of knowing his parents made that space, right? Really made that space to see him like soar and to hold for him. That possibility is beautiful. Yeah. And what you were just saying about your friend playing the violin and how incredibly beautiful that is. We had a listener of ours who he's just a guy from Missouri, right? And I think a lot of times, unless we're Michael Jordan, or unless we have some story where, God forbid, somebody went through a fire, we don't feel whether we need to be either some version of superlative in order for anyone to think that we deserve a life that's meaningful. That's not true. Every
mhm,
person deserves to do the things that light them up. And we had this listener of my podcast, Don't Keep Your Day Job, Greg Franklin, and he told me he was working in a factory that made plastic bags for dog food. That's what he was doing for
mhm,
8 years of his life. Before that, he was an AC repair guy. And when he was growing up, his parents didn't say, like, what do you dream of? They just said, get a job and make sure you have health insurance for your kids. And here he was in his 40s with 3 kids, so unhappy.
mm.
And he told me that he was listening to the podcast and he said, what's just the next little crumb, maybe something to try? And he saw a recipe on Facebook for cheesecake. And he was never a home economics genius. He just was like, let me just try it. And he forgot the cheesecloth, so it burnt. But then the next day he was kind of like, well, I kind of want to do it again. It was kind of fun. Cathy says, be messy. Just take the next little clue. Facebook is now sending him all these recipes because they see he clicked on the other recipe. And he makes 2 cheesecakes. And he says to his wife, well, this is actually good, but we're not going to eat 2. So he drives it down, the second cheesecake, to the fire station in his tiny little town in Missouri. And the fire chief calls the next week and says, can you bring 12 of those? Because one of our chiefs is having a birthday. It was so delicious. He loves cheesecake. He said, sure. And he just kept checking in with me and saying, guess what I did this week? On my day off, I took a freezer bag filled with cheesecake, walked into town, post office, nail salon, dry cleaner, and said, anyone want to buy a $5 cheesecake? And on it went until, no joke, he writes me, you won't believe it, today is National Cheesecake Day, and I just got fired from my factory job. There was a mistake on the machine. I got blamed for the whole thing. And his wife says, you're going to open a cheesecake shop. We're doing it. We're going all in. And they rent this 50 by 10 by 50, tiny little shop. And he says to her, if we can make enough money in 1 month to pay the rent, we'll try it for 2 months. The day they opened, the line was around the block. They made 3 times the rent in the first day. A listener of mine heard me tell the story. He says, I own a chain of grocery stores in the Midwest. I'm carrying the cheesecake, drives to his store. Next thing that happens, the news comes to interview him. Next thing that happens, he has a cheesecake truck. Next thing that happened, it's COVID. His wife was able to leave her job, come work at the shop. They've made more money with this cheesecake than they've ever made in their life. And he
Wow.
says, and you know what? I don't even know if it's my favorite thing ever that I'm supposed to do. I just know I'm having fun. I just know now I'm inspiring people to do their thing. And I'm saying, gosh, that to me is the coolest thing in the world, that here's just a guy, just a plain old guy in the middle of Missouri. And guess what? It mattered. It mattered that he was a happier person.
Yeah.
It mattered a lot. And so we have
Wow.
literally, Terri, thousands now of stories like that. And they all bring tears to my eyes. And they're all such gifts to me that people are willing to go and do it. And I think what I want people to hear from that story is how much we overestimate how hard it's going to be, and what
Mhm.
we underestimate about, like, well, maybe I could literally just go and do this. Like, what did it take for him? It took like, okay, so I'll make a few cheesecakes. I'll see if I can get validation, some proof of concept, which he did. And then little by little, it started to, 4 sales, 5 sales, 10 sales. I think that we make it so all or nothing. Like, well, I would love to play more piano, but it'll never work. It's like, well, maybe if you actually practice for 6 months, you could play some Cerebrellis in
Right.
3 months. Maybe you could do a little concert. Maybe for some people listening, it doesn't even have to be your job. It could just be something that you find pretty delightful that happens every day now.
I think there's something. So first of all, I love that story. And I really, really, really hope that you're making a book of these stories. Like I hope that you're doing that, because there is nothing inspires others. And you know this, that's why you have a podcast, more than the stories of others where they can see themselves, where we can see ourselves. You're like, could I make a cheesecake? Sure. Could I take a risk for 1 month? Okay. Okay. Always with the safety in, like, oh, hey, if we didn't make enough money, then we'll do something else. And again, it's the mindset of small steps moving into that. I wanted to say something else though about what you were talking about with the joy factor, where I would have clients come in and I could always tell, and I always knew whether I wanted to or not, because I'm a cognitive, whatever, intuitive, whatever they call it. I never even knew it was the thing. I just thought I knew everything about people. And then 10 years ago, someone was like, do you know what that is? I was like, no. She's like, well, what is it? I was like, well, I meet people and I know things that they don't tell me about them. She's like, right, you're a cognitive intuit. And I was like, I didn't even know that was a freaking thing. Anyway, I was like, I just thought I was a great therapist. I was like, wow, I know things they don't even tell me.
That's awesome.
Anyway, the joy. So they'll come in and be like, well, I mean, I did acting in college, but it's not like, I mean, I'm a kid, it's like a thing. And I would always go back and be like, hey, let's revisit the acting thing. What if you just acted? What if you just took a monologue class because it feels good, because you liked acting? What if you just went to a local thing? And so many stories of people starting that way. I was like, when we do exactly what you were saying, Kathy, you put the bar so friggin' high, like I need to make a multi-million-dollar cheesecake company. He would have never done it. Never. Who would? We're like, but what if it's about the quality of the time that you spend doing something that lights you up? One of my kids is, doing something in his life. He's got a good career. He's an accountant, blah, blah, blah. But he's moving into this other venture of being really lit up by something. His wife doesn't really understand why he likes it, whatever. And I was like, listen, we were just away last week together as a family. And I was like, babe, my only advice is whatever is lighting you up, whatever you're doing when time flies and you're like, holy crap, that was 4 hours. Oh my gosh. Keep doing that. He's very prudent financially. He's not going to do anything, he'll make sure whatever. But I think that this new thing that he wants to do is like the thing that he's going to do, because time doesn't fly when he's doing accountant work. He's dutiful. He's got 2 kids. He's married. He owns a home. He owns a rental home. Like he's got stuff, but I know, like I had no fear or no trepidation in saying, when he was talking, it was like he was lit up on this new thing. And I'm like, that thing is like, you should keep doing it no matter what.
100%. I had Gretchen Rubin on the podcast early on, and I remember saying to her, what did you learn about happiness? And she said, what I learned is every day people are making these choices. Why? Like, why are you eating that? You think it's going to make you happy. Why are you buying that house? It's going to make you happy. Why? Right? I think we're all in search of happiness. However, she said, nobody's happy. And the reason, she says, I talk to people and I say, well, tell me like what made you happy when you were a kid. And some people will say, oh, playing the cello or reading Anne of Green Gables or whatever else. She's like, when was the last time you read Anne of Green Gables? Oh, I don't do that. When was the last time you played Mahjong? Oh, I don't do that. Why not? Right? Why not? Like you said. And Martha Beck said that to me. Like she wrote this book called The Joy Diet. Like if you want to be the most productive, boy, feeling good goes a long way. If you really want to manifest and be productive, it's like, how about you feel good? Right. And all of these days that we spend grinding it out in these routines of things that really just lull us to sleep. And people say, but it's practical. I mean, the last time I checked, that's the least practical thing in the world, to take the thing that's most valuable called your time, which is not forever. And now you're going to waste that doing things that don't light you up. What is that? Right. I mean, my husband and I were just talking about this because we've been in LA he grew up his whole life there, and I've been there the last 17 years. And during COVID, for 11 months, we came to South Florida because it felt like it was a little bit of a safe haven. We could sort of isolate. My kids had a tutor. They weren't in school. We have the ocean outside. There were bike rides. So it's really nice. And after a while, I was like, I need to get back into a little bit of that buzz. Like, I need to be outside of New York or outside of LA. And we came to this crossroads of like, okay, so we can go back to LA, right? We can go back and do all that. But oh, it's so safe in Florida. And not in terms of like COVID numbers, but the way we live it, right? The way we live it, the kids are home. We've got horseback riding, ocean, peace, easy, no trouble parking. We live out in nature. We don't live near a city. So what's interesting is when it comes down to it, as hard as it is to be in the bustle, right? It's more expensive. It's more traffic. We probably won't be as isolated. So you've got more of that pandemic stuff. It's like, yeah, but does it make you feel more alive? Right? Like, is there more of an adventure in it? And I always wind up voting for the thing that has that life force in it, because what are we saving the money for? What are we doing that for? What is that all for? When you feel alive, isn't that what we want? Don't we want to feel alive? And what's really interesting, Terri, you were talking about Brene Brown and you were talking about joy. She says it's really a self-sabotage thing, because we say all the time that we want this and we'd love to go on a vacation and we'd love to buy this house in France and we'd love to be in a better relationship, but we sabotage it because she says the scariest emotion, it's not fear and it's not sadness, it's joy. She says when you fully drop into joy, you feel the wind in your hair, you dance and you let yourself twirl on that dance floor, you kiss someone and you let yourself receive it, you paint something and you let yourself just break into tears because you let yourself enjoy how beautiful that moment feels. She says within 15 seconds, the study will show that people go into foreboding. Oh my God, why did I just get so happy? What if something happens? What if someone dies? Now that's really interesting, because Gay Hendricks told me recently, if you really want to break through your upper limit, practice receiving. So maybe it's really a good excuse, this like, well, this doesn't make me happy, and this person and my mom, when really we're scared of joy,
Oh yeah. Scared of losing it too. Like therapeutically, there's so much habituated response and reaction to things being good. I've tens of thousands of times I've had people say, but I'm worried.
Right.
I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Oh yeah.
I was like, why? Why are we waiting for the other shoe to drop? Could there be a shift in your mindset that says joy is also your birthright? That being energized, feeling happy, being in relationships that light you up, that challenge you, that make you feel alive, that make you feel desirable or desired or whatever, that could be your birthright too. So I think that you're right on the joy thing. And there's a self-sabotage that I always look at the secondary gain, right? So what is the unobvious gain in sabotaging that joy? I don't have to be vulnerable, right? When we love deeply, when we're vulnerable, we hurt deeply. That's that whole, better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. Unless some people go, I could have just lived without it. But the thing is, can you though? Not really. Like that's what we're doing here.
Yep.
Anyway, for people, two things I want to ask you before we got to go. A, where can people find you before I'm going to ask you the last question? I know, and it'll be in the show notes, but just say it anyway. Where do you hang out the most?
I hang out on Instagram at Cathy.Heller, Cathy's the C. And then the podcast is Don't Keep Your Day Job. And you can find it wherever you listen to podcasts.
And it's so friggin' good, Kath. I love it so much. It's so inspiring. And what I appreciate about you, this conversation, and you're always the same. Like you are actually just legitimately you, whether you're talking to Matthew McConaughey or whether you're talking to me, You are authentically yourself with your emotions right there. You're very in touch. And there's something very, to me, very inspiring about that and liberating. So thank you for being you. And I'm going to ask you a question about boundaries that I have to ask everybody.
Good.
So personally, what has been your most challenging boundary struggle and how did you overcome it?
Very cool. I mean, you were able to fully help me have a breakthrough when I had you on and you talked about being an over functioning codependent. I'm like, what are those words? They just fit so right. Yeah, I think I mentioned to you, maybe I didn't. I mentioned a lot of things to you, but I have been such a pleaser. I can forget all the moments I wanted to speak up for myself and didn't. Forget taking on all my parents' pain and trying to save everyone and chest pains and having to like wear a halter on my chest because I'm like juggling the world. Forget that. I've literally watched myself get a parking ticket because I'm speaking to someone and I don't want to interrupt her. And she would have been like, go pay your meter. Like I was a serial pleaser.
Mm.
And Elphaba has a line in Wicked, and she says, well, if that's love, it comes at much too high a cost. And I've only recently been able to like scoop myself up and say, it's time to come clean. Like, as hard as this is going to be to say this right now, it's going to be so much easier to say this right now. And so I will say, not with any sass, I'm not there yet. I still need to sometimes say 4 sentences instead of 1 word, right? But I will just say, this makes me so uncomfortable. And I had to say something.
Mm.
So it's such a work in progress. But I'm starting to see myself learn how to raise my hand if I need to. And that is the scariest thing in the world. It's so much easier for me to speak to millions of people than it is to tell someone, hey, I can't make that plan, or, hey, that didn't feel good. But thanks to people like you, it's very rare that I meet people like you, but you've empowered me so much. And the work you do is just, I think it's the work, so I
Well,
think
that's a beautiful, beautiful share. And I'm so happy to hear you not over functioning for everyone in the world and talking true and taking care of you because you deserve it. And you're right, right? The Gay Hendricks thing, you want your upper limit. Let's talk about receiving, because that is the next thing we should do another podcast on receiving. We should, or something. We should do like a IG live
I'm
because it
in.
is
I'll have
such a
you on
thing.
my platform to do it. I would love anytime I can spend with you is such an incredible gift. So I'm in.
Well, you're the best. I love and appreciate you so much. Thank you for spending so much time with us here today. To
Thank you
be
so much.
continued, my friend Cathy Heller.
Thank you, Terri Cole. God bless you.
Same, kissing you.
Bye,
Bye.
honey. Bye.